going to start with the first prediction. If anybody was playing predictions bingo about whether or not AI would show up in the predictions, of course it has. And we'll start with this prediction from a member of the Forbes Technology Council who said that AI will reshape the cybersecurity landscape on both defense and offense. And I'm just going to read a quote from this prediction to sort of set the stage. Organizations must prepare for a new world order where AI will serve as both ally and adversary. The key to AI success will not only hinge on its adoption, but also having an in-depth understanding and awareness of AI-related security incidents. So we've done a little bit of preparation and decided to see if we agree or disagree. I think Kathleen and I both disagreed with the statement, and Mohammed agreed with it. So that's the context for which we're going to have a little discussion here. And I think, Mohammed, since you're the outlier here, why don't you start by talking a little bit about why you agreed with this this prediction, why this actually came true in 2025?
Right. So in 2025, AI absolutely delivered on its promise, like what we have been like looking for entire year. So to transform cybersecurity operations, from the defensive standpoint, the defensive teams are actual real gains. So when I was part of them, like so the alert triage became faster than before. So the unnecessary noise got dropped, and the correlation it's has improved a lot. So the SOC, the Security Operations Centers that integrated AI thoroughly and thoughtfully, saw measurable efficiency gains, not just from the marketing wins, but from the analysts spent less time like chasing down like ghosts and more times on real incidents and real triages. So at the same time, so attackers embraced AI with zero hesitation and zero ethics review. So and coming to the phishing obviously became a very contextual part of cybersecurity today. And then that once took weeks was compressed into hours because they were trying to embed from day one from source to sink. So the vulnerability they were discovering day in day out so became continuous, adaptive, and scalable. At the same time, AI didn't invent new attack classes, which is like another a caveat, but then it made existing ones faster, cheaper, and harder to distinguish from legitimate activity. So where we were right was recognizing this was a structural shift, not a trend, just to make sure. So once AI entered the equation on both the sides, so there was no going back. So where we were wrong was assuming autonomy would mature cleanly, cleanly like and safely to come out of the AI picture. But then there are a lot of automations. They were too quickly and too fast. But then we let AI take actions without fully understanding its failure modes. So there was hallucinations as well. Like there was a prompt injection, prompt manipulations, training data, blind spots, and misuse weren't rare edge cases. So those predictable outcomes for deploying probabilistic systems were kind of deterministic environments. So looking forward in 2026, so the improvement is not less AI, but I would more discipline towards AI system, which need every threat model need boundaries, like access boundaries everywhere. So they need logging, they need auditability, they need like authentication, authorization. So most importantly, humans must remain explicitly responsible for high impact decisions from day one. So AI should be a power tool, not an uh, unsupervised operator with key to the buildings.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. There's a lot in there to take apart. I mean, Kathleen, from your perspective, w- what is it that you disagreed with about this statement, about this prediction?
About the prediction. So, listening to Muhammad, that was an excellent overview. I just have to say, I appreciate the thoroughness that you put into your consideration.
Mm.
When I read this, I was thinking along the lines of one of your points, and it was that it's the same landscape, but speed has definitely had an impact. It's also reshaped who's in the workforce, right? And so, how do we come at our response? Um, there are other aspects to be considered along with AI. I believe that AI is, and these rapid changes are one aspect, but that the core controls are coming forward as what really need to be addressed.
Hmm.
And we can layer and layer AI. And I don't hear this often. This is my own personal belief, and part of what we do is um, you can layer and layer AI to solve problems and create problems. But when it comes down to it, you have some core controls that if they're in place, things are better. I personally believe we shouldn't be putting the onus on the human, and it's becoming even more important to consider that with, to your point, the phishing attacks being so sophisticated. Why are we leaving that to a human to pick out that this domain is brand new and it doesn't pass DMARC specifications? And there's a link in here that's brand new and there's malware attached to it. The human shouldn't have to do all of that, right? So um, there are landscape shifts. Things are faster, but core controls remain critical.
I think that for me at least the key here is that term reshape, right? Is it it's clear that AI has had an impact on both offense and defense in cybersecurity. As Mohammed pointed out, right? You've got attackers who are using AI to launch more automated, faster, highly scalable attacks. You've got defenders who are, doing the same on the defense side. But when I look at the landscape and say, okay, are we employing, to your point, Kathleen, the same tools, the same controls, but in an AI world, it still feels to me um, like the advent of virtualization or the advent of cloud. It's a new technology which changes the technical tools that you need to put in place, but not the core controls. It's the same landscape, with I can't extend the metaphor, but different trees, that kind of
So
thing.
I think what also rubbed me the wrong way, and the person writing this had no idea world order would be upended this year, or, we'd be starting on a path where it could be upended. And so choice of that word bothered me, right? And they weren't, I'm sure they weren't predicting the politics and that this actually having an impact on real world order, right? And so that term was a
Yeah,
problem for me.
yeah, yeah. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add there, Mohammed, before I
Um,
jump in.
the only thing I would like to add, as Kathleen mentioned, it was an excellent point. The reason why I picked human judgment remains the differentiator here, because perhaps, the most important signal is also like, timeless. So people still matter because the creativity, the taste, the judgment, and all the problem selection remains uniquely to the human strength here. The companies that are thriving in AI dominant world, so I don't know if those that pair powerful technology with exceptional human talent, or like, it's just going to be the AI lower barriers to execute and learn. So by enabling these individuals to operate outside the traditional comfort zone, but it does not eliminate the need for human leadership. So if anything else, it raises the stakes. That's all I
Yeah.
like, my standpoint.
You've got me thinking about the role of predictability and unpredictability in cybersecurity. When you start thinking about automation, whether it's with AI or not, and the human element, one of the things that human beings add is an element of unpredictability, both on the attacker side and the defender side. As an attacker, that lack of predictability is what allows you to evade controls. And as a defender, that lack of predictability creates risk for the attacker because you might see something that the attacker didn't intend you to see. It's not part of a predictable control that they can evade. So there's interesting whether AI increases or decreases the predictability on either side of the equation is an interesting way to frame it, actually. So I know we've got some other predictions to talk about. If there are any sort of closing remarks on this one, either from Kathleen or Mohammed, please feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we'll move ahead.
And so let's go ahead. There's so much to cover.
Lots to cover. So let's move on to the second prediction we had. There will be an increase in nation state and hacktivist attacks. So in this case, we're talking about a prediction around, to a certain extent, what you were talking about, Kathleen, changes in the geopolitical environment, increased tension between nation states, driving an increase in nation state attacks. And I think in this case, the prediction is sort of putting nation states and hacktivists on two sides of the equation. I'm not sure that's an accurate depiction, but hacktivist collectives also leveraging cyber attacks to further political agendas. And we're talking about at the beginning of 2025, predicting an increase in these types of attacks through 2025. And we had some divergence here. I'll start with my disagreement, and then let Kathleen maybe temper it with some neutrality as a starting point. So for me, I felt like this was a bit of a tautology, for lack of a better term. It basically is always true. Every year we're going to see an increase in these types of attacks, and so as a prediction, it doesn't really ring true to me. It seems like it's not a material change. Rather, it's just a change that's sort of inevitable. Um, and we'd have to argue that in order for me to be convinced that this was an accurate prediction, I'd like to see some evidence that there was a material change here, and I don't think I saw it in the data. So, Kathleen, do you want to jump in there?
My hesitation on this one is, gosh, there likely was an increase, but I would tie it more to what's happening in the world rather than anything technical,
Hmm.
right? Sanctions are known to cause an increase in responsive attack. So there's certain nations like Iran, if a sanction gets put upon them, they do retaliate, and have specific patterns that go back in history in terms of how they retaliate. And cyber is certainly one of them. And the retaliation could be directly to the government that imposed sanctions, or it could be to some other sector that they think would meaningfully impact that nation. So, for instance, like in 2020, it was using VPN attacks and it went against the financial sector in the US and it
Hmm.
drove increases in funding for them. And so the objectives behind any nation state type attacks vary, and I think the political landscape was the driver for that. And I suspect, yeah, there must have been a big increase. I haven't had the time to look at the statistics around it, but with everything that's going on right now in the world, I'm sure there was a large increase, and it depends on how you categorize this. So, this is an active discussion that I've seen on LinkedIn in the last few days or a couple of weeks, in fact, in terms of cyber espionage, cyber warfare, and the related
Yeah,
categorizations. So, this is a tough one to tackle without getting into statistics and then weighing what were the factors, right? No one could have, well, maybe some people could have predicted the tensions in the world.
yeah.
So I'll pause there.
Interesting. It's an interesting one to talk about in terms of the data that's available because while for many businesses around the globe, they're subject to some kind of disclosure law around cybersecurity incidents. Governments themselves generally aren't. So successful or unsuccessful nation state attacks against another nation state aren't necessarily present in the headlines. They're not present in that the 10K report. You're not seeing them necessarily. So it's hard to know without some reporting on it. Yeah, Mohammed.
Yeah, we correctly predicted the rise in the nation state activity. So, but there's a blurring of lines between the state actors, criminal groups, and the hacktivist attacks.
Mm,
So the attacks increasingly targeted trust, availability, and perception. So not just the data theft, to look at it. So also we also correctly anticipated ambiguity and inattribution. So there were proxy groups and deniable operations becoming like more and more common and norm. So what we got wrong, in 2025, was major organizations still optimize their response models. So around attribution and actor naming, rather than impact or containment recovery. So they were all trying to underestimate the psychology and reputation dimensions. So a lot of misinformation, they paid with real intrusions, and there are a lot of enterprise unprepared. The thing with the Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea have sharply increased their use of AI to deceive people online and mount cyber attacks against the United States. So
Mhm.
according to the new research report that I was going to other day from the Microsoft, they released like there are more than 200 instances of foreign adversaries trying to use AI to create fake content online, more than double the number from like from the last year, like July. So this is, looks like it's more than 10 times the number seen in 2023. So, and also the Microsoft annual digital report, threat report shows like there were a lot of foreign adversaries which are trying to adopt new and innovative tactics in their efforts to to weaponize the internet and to create a lot of deception. So the other thing from the AI's potential, there are a lot of said to be exploited by the US force, but again, but the AI is potentially using to automate and improve cyber attacks. But at the same time, they're trying to spread inflammatory disinformation about AI to penetrate sensitive systems. Um, um, and also, AI can translate phishing emails like most into fluent English. Let's say, for example, like you get generated digital clones or senior government officials. That way, you can undermine supply chain, you can undermine like disrupt critical public services, and whatever the partnership built between countries like Russia, that's how there are increasingly attackers are using AI to target governments, businesses,
Mhm.
more and more like critical systems like hospitals, transportation networks.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
Thank you. I have a question. So what I'm wondering, listening to both Tim and Mohammed, is what are your thoughts in terms of these patterns for what's happening in the world versus the normal increases, right? Because we had AI evolve in such a dramatic way in the past year where it has been extremely impactful. And we normally see increases in attacks, and
Mhm.
we've been seeing trends of reduced dwell time for attacks, right? So we can detect them quicker because of use of zero trust and other controls in the environment. So we have that normal trajectory. But I'm wondering, will we see this actually go down once some of the problems across the world in different regions reduce, right? So at some point, tensions will reduce. And so will it be more correlated to the politics or the technology and the general technology trends?
It's a good question. The challenge for me is that and also based on what Mohammed was saying there is I tend to want to divide nation state attacks into a couple of categories and treat them differently, which maybe is not the right thing to do. Because for me, a targeted attack against a particular institution, whether it's a commercial organization or a government, is one thing. A disinformation campaign or a misinformation campaign is a different kind of attack. And maybe they shouldn't be separated, but I do tend to think of them separately. And so to be honest, when I was responding to this prediction, I was thinking of the targeted attacks, not disinformation. Disinformation as a campaign has absolutely increased. I agree. I don't know whether I would argue that that's a uh, a temporary increase or a continuous trend. I think they're different. But
Oh, so
no, go
so
ahead.
I'm not,
No.
yeah, I'm not going down into that distinction because a nation state attack could be for financial gain. In
Sure.
the Iran instance that I cited before, it could be to turn off the lights
Yeah.
or have some other impact. It could be some hybrid warfare aspect that's tied more to the politics than to the cyber trends. And so I guess
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what's the delineation here in terms of trending, and might we actually see it go down if tensions at some point decrease? And
Um,
maybe we move on to the next question because it's a tough question.
Well,
uh,
I want to hear what Mohammed has to say first, and then
Exactly.
we'll move on. Yeah.
Um, the only thing I would say, like, organizations must assume there should be persistent access attempts which are designed for blast radius reductions. So that's a way to go. So I personally believe resilience, recovery time, and intelligence AI-led defense need to outweigh the attribution of strategic importance rather than just like overlooking. So cybersecurity must be treated from day one as part of enterprise risk, not a geopolitical exposure, not just as part of an IT function.
Yeah,
Agreed.
agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's move to the next prediction. So this one touches on zero trust. So we were at the beginning of the year, and this is from a vendor, so keep that in mind. Zscaler at the beginning of the year said that zero trust will become the default security model for enterprises. And the idea there is that zero trust moved from being sort of a forward-thinking approach to kind of the baseline for what organizations are implementing. And I think we had this is a pattern that looks similar from the first prediction. Kathleen and I both disagreed, and Mohammed agreed. So in this case, I'll let Kathleen. Why don't you go first with the disagreement, and then we'll hear from Mohammed about why this came true in 2025.
Sure. My exposure is to both, I guess, the standards aspect. I'm heavily involved in standards space, and that is absolutely going in the direction of supporting zero trust and locking everything down. But adoption of those standards takes time. And then when you look at the enterprise, uh, with my experience from being CTO at Center for Internet Security, working with small and medium-sized organizations, the state, local, tribal, and territorial organizations, they have zero resources, right? And so legacy equipment continues. And of the, I guess, 90,000 potential entities that could be part of that group, while I was there, only 16,000 signed up, and that means 16,000 entities of that 90,000 were calling to get the free resources. And so just this huge swath of organizations, if you don't talk about just the 10 or 1% of enterprises that are able to achieve zero trust, like this enormous number can't even make the phone call to use free things. And so it's not yet the default security model because it's too hard to achieve, it's too costly. And I personally align to the definition for NIST 800-207. And so it's a technology neutral, covering many different aspects of the stack. I view it as pervasive, going down to very gradual, or granular rather, levels, right? So you get down to a modular level, in terms of where you're putting up all of these guards and gates and authentication, integrity and access control. And I'm also heavily involved in the standards that are on, human identity, non-human identity, integrity protections. I'm chair of the RATS working group, remote attestation working group, right? So I'm in these discussions, and we're not there yet for the technology to be pervasive and inexpensive, but we're getting close. And so it's not accessible yet for organizations who have no resources, and that's just the majority of organizations that exist. And then there's vendor products that, only cover one slice as opposed to a broad swath when you look at the technology space and you look at the tenets of zero trust as defined by NIST. And
Hmm.
so I like to follow that definition. So we're not there yet, but we're on a good path.
Hmm. Mohammed, what made you agree with this prediction?
Well, first, I'm not gonna lay out what got right, but let's go in a different. I'm gonna reverse my gears here, like go on what's got wrong in 2025. So,
Okay. All right.
yeah, the too many organizations, they try to equate, try to adopt zero trust with purchasing tools rather than changing their architecture, changing their shift left, and then came up shift right. A lot of things has happened, but the legacy trust assumptions, they were trying to go after under the surface. There were statistic, I would say, statistic entitlements. Like there are a lot of overprivileged service accounts and a weak, weak controls, weak there are a lot of there was the most of the things at organizations weren't in optimal hygiene. So there is a machine identity and a workload trust were largely neglected, so compared to the human entity. Now, shifting gears towards what we got right, based like zero trust became the dominant language of security. The reason why I say this because there were a lot of boards, regulators, auditors. Like I day in, day out, like, I meet with them. So increasingly expected to see zero trust principles reflected architecture as well as the policy. So if you are aware, like there was an OAPS agentic AI security which recently they released last year. So
Mhm.
when I was going through the documentation, all the like 10 projects they are trying to come up with. So the identity replaced network locations as well as a primary control plane in the most modern environments. And and also looking at the from the outer perspective, so from according to the World Economic Forum, so some platforms have already recognized decreasing element of trust, and as well as they attempted to rebuild the entire community-driven verification tools. Let's say, for example, social media platform Twitter, now it's known as X. Like they launched a community-driven content moderation program called Birdwatch back in 2020 or 2021, I don't remember. So which later became the community notes. So this approach invites or like lets us to collectively annotate what has happened that may contain misleading information. So on paper, if you look at it, there is a lot of decentralized fact-checking model and sounded promising, but then as the crowd was going and there was a lot of additional context and highlight inaccuracies, so the community notes have struggled to become the definitive solution in practice. So to sum it up, so there's a limited transparency about who contributes or how specific the notes are elevated. So it's kind of like there are two prominent examples show that all those such measures help some degree but often lack scalability and transparency. So, and looking at from the zero trust standpoint, so zero trust framework always became a potent solution, but as well as and also from the cybersecurity issues, so we can apply a similar concept to the digital information and the trust as well.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think I'm not I'm not convinced whether you agreed or disagreed after that that explanation. It sounds like the real key here is whether is what we mean by baseline, um, the default security model, right? What does it mean for an organization to have adopted zero trust as the default security model? And your point, Mohammed, is that increasingly organizations are requiring zero trust principles as the default. They may not always achieve them, and they may not always implement them, but it's that default. And I think, Kathleen, your point is that it can't be the default if so many organizations simply can't possibly do the implementation because it's too expensive, they don't have the resources, that kind of thing. And I don't know where that leaves me. I had disagreed, I think, because I was more on the side of Kathleen, but it's a challenging one. And there are a couple comments from the audience that are worth mentioning here. So one person pointed out that zero trust is more than just a technical acumen. It's a cultural shift as well. I think, Mohammed, you pointed that out. And then someone else, this turned into a question, said, too many organizations think that buying a tool means that they have implemented zero trust. That's simply false. So will the hype cycle wash away and everyone will forget about it, or will enterprises continue and actually attempt to build out zero trust? Um, and I think that's a valid question, right? Is it hype, or is it a real thing that people are going to continue building out?
In my opinion, real people will build it out, but eventually standards will have these concepts so integrated, and it just takes many, many cycles. It could take sometimes 20 years, right? We're not there with IPv6 yet. So TLS 1.3 isn't widely adopted yet, but it does meet zero trust controls. Um, it will be
Yeah.
forced, though, because TLS 1.2 doesn't support post-quantum. So if you want post-quantum algorithm support, you'll have to move away from TLS 1.2 into TLS 1.3, and there's no more feature upgrades happening in TLS 1.2, right? So eventually standards force this shift. And so if we get down to that protocol layer,
Mhm.
I do have hope. It just takes a really long time.
It's almost as if it has to get boring enough that the vendors stop marketing about it in order for it to be truly implemented.
Yes, and it also takes certain sets of vendors not allowing the less than desirable practices to continue, right?
Mm,
Like browser vendors are tremendously powerful in that regard.
that's true. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In my opinion, zero trust must move from the conceptual alignment to measurable enforcement. So
Yes.
Yeah.
in one sentence, if I want to to sum it up, and
Uh,
then yeah, go ahead,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, what I struggle with there is that zero trust it seems simple to implement it when you look at only a slice of the infrastructure, right? So if you only think about identity and authentication, that piece of it, then human identity and authentication, then zero trust seems like it's implementable. When you start looking at the broader principles and how they apply to the applications that you're building as an organization, the machine identities and how they authenticate, machine identities that are outside your organization even. We'll talk about APIs in a minute, but everything that connects to an API, zero trust as a principle, becomes much harder for an organization to consistently implement. And frankly, there aren't tools. The tools don't exist to implement it in all of those different places. And so I think it's challenging to think of it as the default when you start looking at the broader infrastructure that organizations have to deal with.
Exactly. Since machine identity, CI/CD pipelines, APIs, and AI agents must be governed with the same rigor as a human user. So that's when, you can implement zero trust. So the least privilege must become dynamic rather than being more contextual or continuously validated, not just assigned once and forgotten about that.
Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. I know, Kathleen, any closing comment on that one before we move on? You could say no. We talked it out.
We did talk it out. I think it will happen in time, and it will take pushes as we migrate and as infrastructure and protocols are ready. Then the vendors who have control points can force the change in specific
Yeah,
aspects. But even non-human identity, we're still working on finishing the definitions for that. So to move away from passwords and passkeys, it's going to take time, right? And then the ecosystem, what does your ecosystem support? And you sometimes have to align to your ecosystem to
yeah.
function.
Well,
So,
and
yeah,
it goes back to the resources and the cost. If you have to, there's a comment in here. If we use the NIST special publication as the guide, then ZTA requires reengineering every application at every layer in the protocol stack, which I think is if you think about who has the resources to do that as an organization, almost no one. And so by definition, it's an evolutionary change, not a revolutionary change. Um,
yes,
yeah, interesting.
exactly.
All right, let's move on to one more prediction. We've got two more to go, actually. So the next one, we're back with AI. Generative AI will drive an increase in both the volume and sophistication of attacks that target APIs. Now, I will say full disclosure, I believe this was my prediction. So inevitably, I'm going to agree with it. But we'll have a little bit of disagreement here, perhaps, or at least a little discussion. Um, since it was my prediction, I'll start off by just saying I think this is how could it not have been true in 2025? We've seen the changes in generative AI and how they've impacted how people work in call it mainstream employment, if you will. Uh, Attackers are often early adopters, and generative AI presents a whole bunch of opportunity for them to automate their existing workflows, and APIs are a perfect target because they're ripe for automation as well. So I think Kathleen, you had at least maybe a little disagreement here or a point to make. So I'll let you jump in first.
Thank you. We saw tremendous change in that there was so much generative AI use in this past year, and that was just a stark contrast to prior years. It grew so much from even the agentic standpoint for these LLMs, scanning the entire internet, sucking down content that, how are you defining an attack? So, is that use of sucking down a data pervasively on the internet, is that an attack? And I think many consider it an attack on their content. And so
Yeah.
this is where my disagreement is because I think this is so Tim, I think you had really good intentions, but industry hadn't started at this stage to reclassify new attack methods, right? And Cloudflare responded by finding ways for their customers, for instance, to not allow their content to be sucked down by these agents. And then there's like Wikipedia, whose entire model is based on people going to them for the data. And now you can just pull it up, and the AI agents have all used that as a source of information. And so, my thinking is really along the lines of we had this unforeseen definition of an attack that emerged, and
Mm,
the IE, or no, the Internet Research Task Force group called MapRG had an excellent presentation. Not at the November meeting, it was the July meeting in Madrid. So if you have a chance to listen back to that, the statistics in terms of how internet traffic was reshaped because of LLMs scanning the internet was just fascinating.
mm, mm. Yeah, it's an interesting angle on it to think about. Data scraping. So just as a timely example, we have this incident that's sort of ongoing with Instagram and the 17 million-ish user records that were posted. And in at least in it's an interesting incident because the media has reported that it was that data came from scraping a public API, publicly available API in 2024 or 2022, depending on which publication you're looking at. And Instagram says that there was no breach. It's not an attack. And both of those things can be true, right? Yes, it was all scraped data, but it wasn't a breach because it was a public API. And it makes me think about that same situation. If the data is out there, is it really an attack? Uh, Maybe it's only an attack when someone points out that it was taken. It's a very interesting challenge to define.
Yeah, so if I can just respond
Yeah,
quickly,
please. Yeah. Yeah.
content is, I think, what's of value now, and any new, I think our entire paradigm is shifting. We can regenerate code and act so quickly now that innovations, creativity, new
Mm,
content, there's value to that. And so it is an attack because um, otherwise you're completely devaluing people. And, what is their place in this world if not for our ability to create? Because we have, unique aspects to ourselves that we build upon. Like perhaps, my swimming might have a correlation in my brain to remote attestation, and an AI isn't going to make a correlation from that, but I might as a human, and then iterate in some creative way. And, I think that's one way that people have a contribution and there's value to that. And so just stealing it, it becomes stealing it.
yeah. Go
Um,
ahead, Mohammed.
Yeah, the as both of you there were valuable comments from the API side, but then the breach patterns consistently showed a lot of abuse and weak authorizations over and over. But also there were at the same time there were a lot of excessive trust between services and business logic flaws, which they try to improve from the API. So as a generative, but Kathleen mentioned generative AI clearly accelerated discovery and as well as exploitation. But then specifically, if you look at it in a complex, undocumented way, they are poorly monitored APIs. So keeping that in mind, so I think the unpredictability here that got amplified is the speed of enterprise adoption.
Mm,
I think recently I came across a McKinsey survey that they show around 90% of organizations now use AI in at least one business functions of APIs. So, but then according to IBM's research, it says only 24% of organizations are actually adopted to the API governance frameworks, which is why I see why Kathleen disagrees to that. So the gap means a most enterprise are deploying API Gen AI without sufficient oversight, but what about the models behave? But what the data they use? But what about the outputs they are trying to validate? So in those environments, we lack AI governance, usage controls. So, but then the Gen AI's dependencies on data, but then there's a context that makes it more source at risk. But the defenders are trying to adjust the noise and then trying to lower as possible as they can. But then again, the risk is real. The reason why I say this because the companies have seen um, internal data appear in the public because all thanks to LLM, large language models, long after submission, then often weaker, like, even though they have a good intentions, but then looking for help without debugging or without long-term exposure. So here I feel like organizations are already facing insider risk. So Gen is trying to create a new way for data to leak, but driven by convenience, lack of awareness, or weak controls, I would say.
Yeah, so I mean that leaked data becomes difficult. It's more difficult to for an attacker to leverage, however, because it's behind the logic of a of some LLM, right? It's in the training data, and you have to figure out how to extract it, which is harder to do programmatically.
Yeah, and also the many organizations like contributed to treat API security as a pre-production testing problem, not like, a static scanning or a schema validation where they're trying to overvalue it. But the runtime behavior and the abuse detections and business context were like, they were kind of underinvested. I see why, like, there's another strong point, like adding to Kathleen, but then so how it can be like, overcome like by having an API security must be like, it's treated as a runtime discipline tied to identity, behavior, or intent, not just to input validation techniques. And also having an authorization, rate limits, trusting the boundaries must should reflect in their business workflows, not just technical endpoints.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with that. I agree with that. Okay, good. So we've got one more prediction to talk about. I think we'll move forward to that one. So the last one, also API centric. APIs will be a primary vector for attacking agentic AI platforms. And so remember, we're talking about did this come true in 2025? It was a prediction at the beginning of 2025. This is a prediction that I would happily make about 2026. But did it come true in 2025? And I'm trying to remember if we agreed or disagreed. Oh, I strongly agreed. And we all agreed. Well, that's boring. But let's talk about it a little bit anyway.
I agree
Um,
with the caveat. Just
yeah, tell me the caveat. Go for it.
well, so the industries for agentic AI, they underestimated how indirectly manipulation can work, but looking at the behavior, um, the context of poisoning or a tool misuse rather than traditional exploitation, the security models they lacked innovation first, then they lacked leaving governance frameworks, visibility, and also the immature capabilities that they didn't see it coming. So agentic AI should be explicitly or scope continuously evaluated between those terms from the security standpoint, and also the it's also inherently dangerous because it's impressive like AI agents are like, they have a level of autonomy compared to other models, which has left many people asking the same question, including me, over and over: is AI dangerous? The question mark. To answer that, thankfully, it's no. But then at the same time, like other AI systems, agents AI is a tool, but it's not like any other tool. So I don't know, like, for example, like if taken AI agent is instructed to maximize the social media engagement for influencers are not in a way of like a harmful or a sensational post, but to get most attention towards it. So you need to train a model itself to prioritize those posts not over the content, but over the responsible AI practices like governance, transparency, fairness, and sustainability, I would say.
Hmm, hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, with the question of is AI, is it dangerous? And you said no. I think the answer is not yet. But it does really drive me towards that concept of what are the guardrails and what are the assumptions we make as a human being for what what inherent guardrails should exist that might not. Um, the social media example is a good one because there are a whole bunch of tactics that a human being would never use to increase social media engagement that an AI might come up with that would just be outrageous and wrong. Right? And so those kinds of guardrails are the hardest to implement. They're not really technical guardrails. They're semantic guardrails, which is a real challenge. But that's not really about the prediction as so much, right? Because we're talking about, attacking those agentic AI platforms and, what will those attack vectors be? Will they be APIs or will they be something else? So, Kathleen, do you want to jump in there?
Yes. So I think this is a pretty obvious one, right? Because APIs exploded this year because of AI, right? And so, of course, they're
Mhm.
going to be attacked more. We still have prolific use of passwords and API keys. We haven't fully made a shift over to the forms of non-human identity that rely on a public-private key pair that gets replaced every, 5 minutes or less even, and is stored only in memory and not in a
Sure.
file somewhere, right? And so those are some pretty big shifts that will happen. They're underway. They've happened in some environments, but not all. And so just the vast amount of APIs. So yes, this absolutely
Yeah.
came true, but I think it will also decline for the reason, not just for the authentication, authorization work to improve, the ability to reduce the attack surface, movement toward TLS 1.3, movement towards making sure that's protected with Acme so that even your TLS is using short-lived certificates. But then your infrastructure, we're starting to see some LLMs deploy isolation points as part of their standard practice. And so the more that happens, the ability to escape out of what you exploit is very much reduced. And so I see a lot of hope and promise for the future. Maybe not 2026. I think it's going to take a
Mm.
while. We'll see some of that because some of it's already come out. Um, but the years to come, I think it will just get better.
I think we haven't yet seen a large scale public compromise
Hmm.
attributed to agentic AI or of agentic AI of an agentic AI system as the target. Um, we've seen some small scale incidents, I would say, but so often in this industry, the thing that drives real change is a large scale public incident. Unfortunate though that may be.
And
Uh,
then how are we classifying the incident, right? Because if
right.
it's something like interrupting what the seed data looks like by feeding in bad data, that might become a bigger attack vector than the technology aspects of, encryption on the wire, authentication,
True.
your sandboxing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's certainly true. That's certainly true. It's a good question. It's a good question. So I think that was our last prediction that we wanted to cover. There's one question that goes back in the comments back to zero trust, which I'll put out there, and then I'll kind of ask us a final question before we wrap up. So um, for zero trust, do you believe the only way to truly protect assets is using an FOB or card with number gen to gen a code off device like phone, tablet, SMS? So is this a question about, multi-factor authentication and zero trust? Is that the only way to really protect things, protect assets? I don't know if Kathleen or Mohammed, if you'd like to provide a response to that.
My opinion is that's not the best answer. We're leaning hard into public-private key pairs. And so I teach at Georgetown, security architecture and design. And one of the things I emphasize with that is that students learn those basic functions because it is everywhere. It underpins so much. And some are tied to, certificate authorities, but then like the WebAuthn standard is just raw public-private key pairs issued individually. And so there's lots of different models. I am in the process of writing up more on this so that you can decide which of those to use and learn more about it. Um, but the fob and the OTP, the one-time password
Hmm.
models, they're good. They still work. There are some problems with it, but I think, we are moving away from it for both human and non-human identity.
Thanks, Kathleen. Great response. So just to wrap us up here, I think for a last question, um, were there any important security issues in 2025 that didn't show up in these predictions, but probably should have? So if you were thinking back to something that happened in 2025 that we didn't really cover, was there a major event or a major, uh, say, a prediction that we should have talked about? Yeah, Kathleen, you look like you've got a response.
Yes, the changes in how we work,
Mm,
right? And what the workforce looks like. And then even seeing today, there is an analyst company that came out with a number that they're attributing to their workforce for their AI agent use. And I kind of think that's legitimate based on my own use. If I'm, building something complex and basing off of my own intellectual property, my own writing, I can do iterative works that have me walking away from my desk for a few minutes because I just finished something that would take like a day or a week, and I'm continually blown away.
Yeah, I think you're right. The velocity, we talk a bit about velocity in terms of like development, but we don't really talk about velocity in terms of the workforce or the individual and how much more you can accomplish as an individual in a short period of time. And there are definitely benefits to that, but there are also costs. Because the thing that we have not increased velocity in is the ability of for us as human beings to consume information. We can produce more work, but we as
Mm,
individuals can't necessarily consume it faster.
that's a great point.
Yeah,
The
yeah, go ahead,
two
Mohammed.
two things I would think is like the insider threat and as well as the unpatched software vulnerabilities. Most of
Mm,
them are overlooked. So software vulnerabilities, there are no available patches. So they pose a a serious security threat. But as they at the same time they allow attacker to gain access to weakness in organization systems. So while
yeah,
software development teams are quick in their attempts to patch bugs, but at the same time they need to deliverables. So the unpatched system remains as is, but then that's how they gain access and system gets change sensitive data.
yeah. That's interesting. There are two things in this webinar that date me significantly. One, we were talking about IPv6 as a standard. I have a small Lucite award on my bookshelf for implementing IPv6 in a vulnerability scanning product, I think 20 years ago, actually. And speaking of unpatched vulnerabilities, 20 years ago, I guarantee you I was doing webinars about unpatched vulnerabilities, and it's still a problem. We still haven't solved it. So
Mhm.
while we talk about predictions and the future, some of these challenges that we have continue to be sort of evergreen, if you will, keep us all employed, as the case may be.